papers in the Ecumenical Review Journal in 2018 and 2019. Well, without further ado, I shall turn to Joas to guide us in this evening topic, PassOver and CrossOver, Rethinking the Church after Easter. After Joas's presentation, I will open up for conversation and discussion. So you may comment or ask in English or Indonesian directly to Joas or using the chat column at the right bar of the Zoom. So Dr. Joas, thank you very much for your time and your generosity. I know it is around 6 a.m. in the morning when the whole city is still in slumber. But thank you for waking up very early this morning just to be prepared for this session. We have been looking for the time in which we could invite you, and here we are, we have you with us. We are delighted to have you with us this evening. So friends, please join me in welcoming Joas Adiprasetya.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nindyo, and also Jason for having me. And I'm very honored to be part of this wonderful conversation, and good evening, everybody, and also good morning for those who live in Jakarta or Indonesia. Well, the topics that I'm going to share this morning or this evening is part of my research, and it is partly expressing my disappointment with my own church that becomes more and more solid and institutionalized, but also it is my hope for the future of my own church. So I begin this research soon after we celebrated Easter a couple of weeks ago. And the title of my presentation is PassOver and CrossOver, and how we rethink the church after Easter. So let me share my PowerPoint so that you can follow my presentation and not dependent much on my broken English. Okay. So I believe that most Christians agree that Easter cannot be theologically separated from the Passover in Judaism that commemorates the Hebrews' liberation from slavery in Egypt and the passing over of the forces of destruction. It is called Passover precisely because it points out to the sparing of the firstborn of the Israelites when the Lord smote the land of Egypt on the night of the Exodus. Thus, the Exodus becomes the prototype for the Christian Easter that celebrates the resurrection of our Lord, passing over the death. In other words, Moses, the most important figure in the Exodus, is seen as the prefigura of Christ as the new Moses. My question is, why is it important to configure a healthy theology of Passover or crossover that connects the Jews' Passover to the Christian Easter? It is because we are talking about the same God, the one who liberated the Israelites and rose Jesus from death. We believe in the same God, the one who always works through a mode of passing over or crossover. In other words, this is the divine methodology. If we read closely the Gospel of Luke, for example, the linking between the linking together of Moses and Jesus is quite obvious. The author of Luke seems to maintain the configuration of the Exodus and the resurrection of Jesus Christ through the presence of Moses. One of the best examples is the Transfiguration story in Luke chapter 9, and you can see the verses on the screen. Let me read the whole 3 verses. Quote, and while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they saw 2 men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appear in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. And it's very interesting compared to the other 3 gospels that in the original Greek, the word used for the departure is tan exodon, which is obviously referring to the Exodus. And we do not find such a linkage in other 3 gospels. And we know that theologically, the transfiguration event is precisely the prefiguration of Jesus' resurrections. In other words, the transfiguration is something like an appetizer or hors d'oeuvre of the resurrection. So we can taste the resurrection before it happens. In that sense, the author of Luke invites the readers to see the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ as another Exodus. And moreover, the 2 prophets, Moses and Elijah, who appear in the transfiguration of event, reappear a couple of times in other events, especially in the writings of Luke. For example, on the resurrection day, it is only in Luke that we find 2 men in dazzling clothes, telling the women that Christ has risen. So traditionally, we expect that the 2 men are angels. But in the Luke writings, it seems that the author tried to place again the 2 prophets, Moses and Elijah, on the scene. And also when we read the story of Jesus' ascension into heaven, it is written, suddenly 2 men in white robes stood by them, by the disciples. So we can find in many more places in Luke and Acts the conjoining of Moses and Jesus. And if you are interested more in the issue, you can consult the works of many New Testament scholars, especially someone named Hans Conselmann. But what I'm trying to show you is that in the Gospel of Luke, the figure of Moses and Jesus Christ are, interconnected very closely, and by doing so, Luke is also trying to connect the exodus of the Jewish people and the Christian Easter. So my question now is, what did exactly happen in the Exodus after the Pesach, the Hebrew word for Passover? The people of Israel who have resided in Egypt for more than 400 years suddenly became a pilgriming people. The domesticated people turned into a sojourning community in the wilderness. However, it was not really a change of identity, I believe. Being a sojourning or pilgriming people is not actually a new thing for them. Why? Because their ancestors were also pilgrims. Let us read, for example, Deuteronomy chapter 26, verses 4 to 9. And let me read it for you. When the priest takes the basket from your hand and sets it down before the altar of the Lord your God, you shall make this response before the Lord your God. A wandering Aramean was my ancestor. He went down into Egypt and lived there as an alien, few in number, and there he became a great nation, mighty and populous, and so on and so on. So in verses 5 to 9, we find the creed, the confession of the pilgriming people who try to reclaim their rootedness in the identity of their pilgrim patriarch. A wandering Aramean was my ancestor. Thus, they were a people of journey, being domesticated in Egypt, and now they return to their original identity, their true identity. Well, we can discuss extensively about whether the wandering Aramean was Jacob, whose father-in-law Laban was an Aramean, or he was Abraham. The majority of interpreters would suggest that the text is referring to Abraham. And if it is the case, then interestingly, since Genesis 14, verse 13, we can read for the first time that Abraham is called the Hebrew. Abram the Hebrew. And you know that the word Hebrew comes from the root word Ivri, meaning to transfer, to cross over, to pass over. And so the word Hebrew that is put after the name Abraham is the one who crossed over. And we can find the same identity in Joshua 24, verse 3. Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led him through all the land of Canaan and made his offspring many. Well, you can also find the importance of the word Hebrew or Abar, meaning crossover, in so many places in the Old Testament. For example, in the story of Jacob struggling with God by the Jabbok River and his encounter with Esau in Genesis 32 to 33. The word Abar, meaning passing over or crossing over, is mentioned so many times. And in that story, Jacob's name is changed into Israel, from which the whole nation received their name. Thus, the identity of Israel as the crossing over people is established at that night when Jacob struggled with God. And look at what happened after the Israelites people went out from Egypt. The first rite of passage that they had was to experience, the crossing over the Red Sea, as if they were reformed to their initial identity as the crossing over people. And after that, it took 40 years for them to cross over the desert before finally crossing over the Jordan River. So what I'm trying to demonstrate is that the true identity of the Israelite people is not connected to the land, but to the fact that they are a pilgriming people, to the moving of the people, not to the residing of the people on the land. So I think we can use the dialectic between the land, the promised land, and the crossing over movement, to shed lights on the issue of Palestine and Israel right now. And let us now turn to the New Testament, in which the concept of pilgrim or sojourner is expressed as paroikos. Coming from two words, para means besides and oikos means meaning house. Paroikos literally means beside the house or dwelling beside, or even some people translate it as a resident alliance. So we can find here a sort of dialectics between moving and residing, walking and abiding. As I said earlier about Luke, who linked Moses to Jesus, the Exodus and linking the Exodus to the resurrection, Luke wrote the second book after the Gospel, which is the books of Acts. And the main characteristics of the book is the spreading, the moving of the believers in their missional life. They were doing their missional life by crossing over through new territories as strangers. And by doing so, they witness God who befriend humanity through Jesus Christ, our friend. To be specific, I want to draw your attention to Acts chapter 8, verse 4, that indicates how the believers begin to spread. Quote, now those who were scattered went from place to place proclaiming the word. And we understand that it happened soon after the stoning, the killing of Stephen. Verse 1 to 2 say, that day a severe persecution began against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout the countryside of Judea and Samaria. Devout men buried Stephen and made loud lamentation over him. The spreading of the gospel and the becoming of the crossing over community is somehow triggered by the stoning of Stephen. It became the justification as well of both the missional life and the unlinking of the early Christians from the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And I would like now to give you a short reflection on the speech of Stephen before his killing. And if you have your Bible at hand, I invite you to open it up, but I also put it on the screen. In Acts 6, verse 11, the Jewish leaders accused Stephen for blasphemy against Moses and God. But then we can read in verse 13, they changed the subject from Moses to the Torah law and from God to the holy place, holy temple. And Stephen was taken to the Jewish religious council. And let us read carefully what Stephen said to the council in chapter 7. And I will lead you slowly to read certain important verses in chapter 7. Here, Stephen employed the word oikos, or house, so many times, and other words derived from that particular word, oikos. He began his speech by retelling the history of the Jews' ancestors, trying to make a connection with his accusers. He told the story of Abraham, who was in Mesopotamia before leaving. The Greek word is katoikesai, from two words, kata and oikos, meaning, residing or dwelling in Haran. And you can read it on verse 2. He repeated the story of Abraham in a more detailed way. Let me read the whole verses. And Stephen replied, brothers and fathers, listen to me. The God of glory appeared to our ancestor Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia before he lived in Kata and Oikos, Haran, and said to him, leave your country and your relatives and go to the land that I will show you. Then he left the country of the Chaldeans and settled in Kata Oikos again, in Haran. After his father died, God had him move. And another word coming, meta oikos, metokisan, from there to this country in which you are now living. Again, kata and oikos. So now we have two words, katoikos, kata and oikos, and metoikos, meta and oikos. The first means, moving, and the other means dwelling. The dialectic between settling and moving is introduced here. But then another paronyms of oikos emerged as Stephen continued his story of God's promise to Abraham that his descendants would be resident aliens or paroikos in verse 6, in a country belonging to others. The story of the fifth ancestors continued with Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. It was Joseph who was marginalized and victimized by his brothers, but then he was appointed by Pharaoh to become the ruler over Egypt and over all his household. The word oikos appears there at verse 10. And I'm not reading the whole verse here. What I'm trying to show is that another word coming here, which is paroikos, that God intend to be the identity of the people. But then in verse 20, and we can find here how, let me read it. At this time, Moses was born, and he was beautiful before God. For 3 months, he was brought up in his father's house. So the word oikos coming here, and it means the whole dynasty, the whole, the whole country, the whole palace. But then if we jump to verse 38, it says he, or Moses, is the one who was in the congregation in the wilderness. And I believe this is the core of Stephen's speech, where he is trying to show the identity, the true identity of the people of Israel, that they are not supposed to dwell in the holy temple, but they're supposed to be a moving people. The ecclesia and the eremo, meaning the church in the wilderness. Okay, and then citing the prophet of Amos, Stephen expresses God's disappointment toward the house of Israel, the oikos Israel in verse 42. And then God removed the Israel, and here we can find the same word, meta and oikos, meaning, remove or moving, to Babylon. In verse 47, after telling the story of David, Stephen told his audience about Solomon, who built a house, and a new word coming here, using the root word oikos, which is oikodome or oikodomesen, coming from two words, oikos meaning house, and domas also mean house. So oikodome basically means, housing house or building house. So what we find here is, Stephen playing the word of oikos and its paronyms, its derived words, so beautifully. And then in verse 48, he says, yet the Most High does not dwell, kata and oikos again, in houses made with human hands, as the prophet says. And he cited the prophet again, heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. What kind of house, oikos, will you build, oikos and domas, for me, says the Lord? Or what is the place of my rest? Did not my hand make all those things? So you see throughout this speech, and it's very fascinating, a deep theological speech coming from someone who is about to be killed. What can we learn from this, speech, very long speech of Stephen? I believe there are some points that we can learn here. The oikological history of Stephen, I would say. And allow me to summarize several interesting points here. The first one, we find some keywords as well as patterns, theological patterns here. The root word is oikos, or house. But then we have two sides. On the one side, we can find, the tendency of the people of God to reside, to stay. And it used meta oikos or metoikos, housing. And even it will lead to the building of the house, to make it settle, to make it permanent, oikodomi. But on the other side, we find another word that God does to the people whenever they are trying to reside, which is katoikos, kata and oikos, unhousing. And even the purpose of God by unhousing the people is that they can live in their true identity as paroikos, or pilgrim. So the second point that I want to point out is that God is certainly disappointed in any attempt of the people to settle in a house, metoikos, since it will lead to the house building, oikodomi, and the people will lose their identity as paroikos, or pilgrims. And thirdly, every time people try to house God, God then unhouse them and push them back to be paroikos. The Israelites is the congregation in the wilderness, and that is the true identity of the people. And finally, and this is what strikes me most, is that God rejects any attempts to associate God's self with a certain place like the Holy Temple. And that is the core of the accusation against Stephen. In his defense, Stephen argued that God cannot be domesticated. We could not, and we should not tame God. A tame God is really not God at all. We are invited to believe in a wild God, God as the beast, the God whom we cannot steer or manipulate for our own interests. So the idea of the church as the pilgriming community, or paroikos, or the crossing over, the moving people, occurs constantly in the Bible as well as in the writing of church fathers. And let me give you some example. You can find in 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 17, saying, if you invoke as Father the one who judges all people impartially according to their deeds, live in reverent fear during the time of your exile. The word exile use the Greek word paroikias. And also in the first letter of Clement is one of the oldest church father. He wrote a letter to the Corinthians, and he began his letter by saying, the church of God which sojourn, paroikos, at Rome, to the church of God sojourning at Corinth. So Clement is trying to identify the people in each place and address them by saying that they are paroikos, they are pilgrims. And also one beautiful writings, the title is The Epistle to Diognetus, written around 130. It says in chapter 5, verse 5, let me read you. I don't put it on the screen. They dwell, he is talking about the identity of the Christians. They dwell in their own countries, but only as pilgrims. They bear their share in all things as citizens, and they endure all hardships as strangers. Every foreign country is a fatherland to them, and every fatherland is foreign. So I think after Easter, we are called to be paroikos, a crossing over community, a community whose members realize that being pilgrims is always in encounter with strangers. However, such an idea becomes problematic, I believe, when we include some other identities. They are very familiar with us today. Some identities that do not have any privilege to become a pilgrim. For example, migrants and refugees. They are also moving, they are also crossing over, but they are not pilgrims. They cannot be seen as pilgrims, but they have to cross over the borders to survive. And as pilgrims, we might meet them on the road of life. After all, the theological insights from the story of Stephen is still relevant. God's rejection of the Israel people building the house for God and for the security resonates with how we as nations build our walls to reject those strangers, those migrants and refugees coming into our house, coming into our nations. And by that, I want to ask a question and let us discuss this. How do we reclaim the identity of our church as crossing over pilgrims while engaging with other involuntary strangers such as migrants and refugees? How does oikodome, house building, relate to the slogan of MAGA? And I'm sorry to mention this disgusting word, MAGA, make America great again, with its wall building. How do we respond to this? On the other hand, there are so many conservative Christians who undermine the value of pilgrimage and turn into a kind of religious tourism. Instead of walking as pilgrims who celebrates life, who give life, they are trying to neutralize themselves from life and death issue and ignore the politic of death emerging in the site where they enjoy the religious scenes. So my question is, to what extent does the idea of crossing over pilgrims relate to the practice of religious tourism infused with religious conservatism, neutralizing itself from the politic of death? For example, the Holy Land tourism to Jerusalem. So these two questions might, trigger our discussion later. So let me conclude my sharing here inconclusively, hoping that we can discuss further what it means to be a crossing over people, what it means to be a post-Easter people. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Joas. It's a very enlightening and inspiring talk, I believe. So I will move and I will turn to you all for you to respond, to ask questions, or to discuss, and especially the points that Joas gave to us about who is the pilgrim people today. Please feel free to unmute your screen and talk to everyone. Or
and I hope you can understand my broken English there.
Yes, I think, yes.
Thank you.
And Joas also provides a handout which you can find it here. So if you want to find the handout, please go to this file and you will see also the handout that Joas prepared. So the time is for all of us. And by the way, if you don't want to talk, to speak up, you can use also the chat column at the bottom of your screen.
Jason, I guess it is a case sensitive, so you have to put capital.
Oh yes, right. It is case sensitive.
Cheers.
Cheers. I think I'm making things worse by typing it in. Dr. Adiprasetya, thank you for a deeply engaging lecture on this important topic in this time. You really brought it home when you're talking about building walls, being together, crossing over. How do we do that in this time? Anabaptists and Mennonites, we often talk about our identity is in heaven. We're ambassadors here. Stanley Hauerwas, you know, his book Resident Aliens, even though he's technically not an Anabaptist, we tend to gravitate towards this theological language as well. This resonates deeply with our theological framework. So thank you for taking us into this place.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, that was really great. Thank you very much. Just sort of to add to it, one of my friends, Daniel Boyarin, teaches Talmud at Berkeley. He's a Orthodox Jew who's a very interesting character, but it's like against sort of Zionist sort of Judaism. Even though he's an Orthodox Jew, he's sort of written on how being diaspora, Jews as part of the diaspora, you know, scattered, not at home, in fact, is the true identity of being a Jew. So that crossing over, not being there, it's like having an identity that's shaped not by land, you know, against all of the notions about Judaism being shaped by the land, but like you were saying, it's like it's crossing over and not being there, not in that one place that in fact defines your identity. So, you know, that comment is just sort of reinforcing what you said, which was very, very interesting and very provocative. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And the word diaspora means also dia, meaning crossing, and you know, scattered crossing. Yeah. And that's why in other article, I'm trying to propose a new identity of the church, not new identity, new word for the church, which is in the Greek, you know, you always use ecclesia, but maybe the crossing over church should be called diacclesia instead of ecclesia. Diacclesia, an ever crossing people called to cross over.
Yes, I think we read that article, right? I know Jason is also want to say that, and I know that some of us also read that article. So I'm wondering how you thought about that article. Please feel free, Jason.
Yeah, it's interesting. Dioclesia, we're crossing over and we're entering into something new, yet we're not fully there yet. It's kind of this transitional space where we know our identity, but we haven't come into the fullness of our identity, but we have to exist and be as if we are in the fullness of that identity in this world, because in a sense, the kingdom that will come, the kingdom that is to come will come through us, the body of Christ. Yeah, so it's fascinating how you make that paradigm shift.
Thank you. Yeah. Actually, you know, that every theology is an autobiography. So actually it is rooted in my own struggle with my identity. I am the fourth generation coming from China. You know, in Indonesia, among the Chinese people, I cannot speak Mandarin anymore. So they called me fake Chinese. Among the original Javanese people, not Japanese, but Javanese people, you know, they always treat me as a foreign, as an alien, Chinese. So I'm in between, but also in both. But more than that, my father is a pastor, and he has a commitment to move from one city to another city every 5 years. So my identity, my life is always like in a move, crossing over boundaries all the time. So if I count how many times I move from one place to another, it's like around 20 times. So it gave me an idea that the true identity of human being is always moving, crossing over. And in that move, we always meet the strangers, and we are the strangers to them. So how we deal with the strangers, host, you know, enemies, friends is come into play. And it pushed me to reinterpret the idea of the church, not only as a people, you know, called out of the world and coming into a place, reside in that place, but as a moving people, as a crossing over people. That's you know, the background of why I proposed the idea of dieclesia instead of ecclesia. But thank you, Jason, and thank you for reading that piece. Yeah.
Yes.
This is Mel here, and I would want to raise the question of, I very much appreciate your comments, wonderful comments. I would challenge us to think of the question of figurative homelessness and literal homelessness. I believe we're called to figurative homelessness. You've done a wonderful job of helping us see that. But here with the coronavirus, the COVID-19, the pandemic, we are facing a whole lot of people who are going to be very anxious about literal homelessness. People losing their jobs and people out on the street. And we're facing a real social catastrophe. So how do we incorporate both the great theological insights you've shared? At the same time, I think we as Manhattan Mennonite, we may need to do some thinking about providing homes for homeless people. So there's the challenge I would ask us to, we might want to think about.
Wow. Are we going to discuss among us, or?
Yes, I think we can open up the response to others.
Yeah.
So please feel free to jump in to respond to this question. This is not merely for Joas, I think.
Yeah. But let me start before I forget everything. Okay. That's the beauty and the use of, you know, thinking theologically, I guess, when it has not happened before, it was the time for us to think theologically about the figurative homelessness, so that after it happens, our you know, figurative homelessness can be transformed into you know, to empower us to deal with the literal homelessness, you know, instead of thinking about this issue when it happens. You getting what I'm trying to say? I cannot express it. So it is better for us to, you know, to build our theology as a you know, pilgrims, that we are homeless figuratively on earth, and it will create our own identity. But then when the pandemic happened, when the homelessness occurs so many around us, then something that we already taught before, give us power to do what we have to do.
Mm.
Rather than, when we are shocked by the fact, and then we think, a new way when we are in shock. You know what I mean? So that's the power of doing theology, of thinking theology. The powerful, a powerful theology must be done before we have the problem. So it will create a new us, so that when something happens, then our imagination can empower us to do what we have to do. That's my. But we are not late yet. I mean, it is also okay to do the imagination when something is shocking us, and then we trying to reinterpret, to rethink who we are before that reality. So that's my thinking.
Thank you for your thinking. This is Clark Bell. My ministry over the years has been with homeless people. And this is a key time in the life of our congregation, because in Manhattan, where Jason pastors Manhattan Mennonite Fellowship, we rent space, we seek the shalom of the city, we seek the peace of the city, and our mission is pilgrim-like. We have one of the best deals in Manhattan as far as rent at the Quaker Meeting House. But there's also an initiative to start a Brooklyn Peace Church and a Brooklyn Peace Center that is more, the understanding would be that there's a place for people to come to, getting back to what Mel mentioned, possibly in these times, that there would be a center for people to come to as well. So there's a tension there for us in the congregation that we're working through, and your message this evening was very timely, as I also appreciated your open ecclesiology piece earlier. But this is a very timely message for us to understand what it means to be resident aliens, to be a church in our context, both in Manhattan and looking to the future in Brooklyn. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Clark. Thank you. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
When I think about that kind of what is our role with the homeless, I think I worked in foster care for a lot of years, and I know sometimes when the girls would get out of foster care and they would become more established, they would say things to me like, "You want to live that life of giving to people. I want to make money now. I want to get ahead." So I think there is a role at which it's harder for those who don't have by choice to make comments about things than those who don't have by circumstance. And I think about like Jesus, when, there were lots of people around and they were hungry, he said, "Let's feed the people."
Mm-hmm.
And they did the loaves and the fishes, and he fed people, he healed people. So he was doing the literal and the figuratively, all at the same time. He was feeding people the love and the word of God, but he was also giving them fish. He was giving them real food. So I think with the homeless, there's a level at which we shouldn't romanticize people who are homeless and poor, not by choice, at the same time that we ourselves might choose to do with less because we feel that God, the rich through the eye of the needle, that kind of thing. God isn't looking for wealth, but that doesn't mean we should project our dislike of wealth onto people who aren't doing it by choice, but are there because of the circumstances and the way our world operates.
I really like the nuance that you're bringing to this conversation, Nancy. And when I think about it, for me, also working with the homeless, you know, I don't want to be homeless by any means. It's a horrible, difficult thing. But I think when I know where my true home is, then for me as a European American, cisgendered male, white American man, with all sorts of unearned privileges that I've done nothing to gain, for me, taking that posture of repentance and allowing those things to die allows me to live more fully into the promises that God has for all of us. So I have to keep searching my heart and seeing where do I need, in a sense, to be homeless? Where do I need to give up more so that I can be deeper in the Christ identity, so that I can be resurrected, and where I can find new life and hope, and there's so much despair in the world. But that's the challenge, and that's what the modern Christians don't get, because they want to build walls. They have the dualistic thinking, who's in and who's out. It's not this unity of consciousness. It's not this oneness of inclusivity where all are welcome into the heart of Christ. So this nuance is very important, because the literal homeless, they don't want it. They have, they want a new thing.
Hi, this is Zijun. I want to share, like, one of the point about the culture of desert. So, and then also like I'm thinking about the culture of pilgrim. And then, so one time I was doing dumpster diving. So work with other homeless people, and then a street man gave me, like, he found some eggs, so he gave me the eggs. So he told me, you have a house, you got a stove, so you can cook. So he gave me all the whole tray of eggs. So I think there's a culture of sharing when there is not when you don't have something, or like the homeless people told me, because you have a house, you got a stove, so you cook. And then similar thing I also see in Iraq, like people are not so rich like people in the USA, but there's no food generally in the country. So I remember one of Iraqi friend came to United States. He was surprised that there are so many people become homeless and become poor and then struggle with survive. So he told me that this kind of things will not happen. Everyone will be taken care of because they all got family. So I think there's some kind of sharing, a culture of sharing in this culture of desert, and in this culture of homeless, that is speaking to the culture of possession, culture of capitalism or culture of war.
Yeah, thank you, Zijun.
Joas, just one comment in relationship to Mel. I mean, I don't want to, talk too much here, but the closet theologian is sort of brought out with a good little reflection, a little bit of wine. So it's like, it's not like, I mean, every one of these terms, you talked about how the word oikos is part of those terms. It's a different kind of oikos. It's a different kind of dwelling together. It's not saying that we shouldn't have a dwelling together. We shouldn't have this connectedness, this place. So it's not a sort of argument that we shouldn't have such dwelling. It's just saying we should dwell differently together. Yes. And so it's not a romanticization of being on the streets at all. It's just saying we need to dwell together as not defined by the bounds of nation, but by being sort of scattered, but still dwelling together in genuine community. Because all these terms had oikos in it. It didn't say oikos doesn't matter. It said we need a different kind of oikos.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like you know, we always think in dualism between the oikos as the destination and the journey, but it's not. It's like, you know, the journey is our home. So we have our oikos precisely by journeying together. Not that we are going to our home, but you know, by walking, we are already home, precisely because we are together with our beloved and with the strangers. And yeah, you're so right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you also for that point, Doctor. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clark. Any other comments or questions? Carla? Yes, please unmute your screen. Yes, please.
I'm Carla and my son Jason, and happy to meet you.
Thank you.
Jason has been to Indonesia.
Oh, where? In Jakarta?
We love Indonesia, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much for
coming.
Thank you.
Can you tell me something very important that we should do? Very, very important for us.
Well, I don't know, ma'am. I'm not in the position of telling you what you have to do.
Oh, but your sermon gave us good ideas.
Yeah. What I'm thinking is that I just want to disturb you, to annoy you. So as long as my reflection is annoying to you, disturbing, then I think it's enough. And and your part is to be disturbed and annoyed, and then, you know, struggle with your own context and situations. So I'm not someone who can tell you what you have to do. So
oh, I understand, of course.
Yeah. So I'm trying to disturb everyone's, you know, mind, and then
I like that. Disturb people, annoy them. Good.
Yeah. Thank you, man. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll do that. I'll be more annoying.
Okay.
But we can open up to anyone who want to comment, whether in English or in Bahasa Indonesia. Please feel free to jump in and say what you have in your mind, and we can discuss that. I bet Joas will translate in English.
So, Nindyo.
Yeah, Carla's question can be discussed by all of us. Please feel free.
This is Mel with a slightly different take. Doctor, thank you again for your comments. I had the great privilege of being in Indonesia about 25 years ago, and it was a wonderful experience. And I was in Medan, and I was in Jakarta, and I was in Yogyakarta, and I think it was Sulawesi, although I forget that last detail. And I remember being so impressed with the diversity of Indonesia. It was told to me there were something like 2,000 islands as far apart as New York and Los Angeles. And again, to play with that sense of paradox. On the one hand, everybody lived together, but it wasn't quite that simple, that there were tensions in the real world. And I wonder if here in America, we're having our struggles, all managing to figure out how we're going to do this battle with the coronavirus together. Any insights you have from how Indonesia copes and the learning process that you've had of all those different islands, all those different traditions? Somehow you all do a job of living together with some, you know, hither and yon, but you manage. Any insights that you could bring to us in America as we struggle with red states and blue states and people who want to social distance and they're sick and tired of staying home, and any wisdom you could bring to us at this moment from the Indonesian perspective?
If I may add on that, especially Indonesia, where Muslims is the majority, they are having Saum now, or fasting month, and they will have I think at the end of the Ramadan month, the custom will, many people will go back to their hometown to be with their family. So is that a challenge in Indonesia right now, Joas?
Yeah, especially with the we have not 2,000 islands, but 17,000 islands. So much more than, yeah. So it's so many, but yes, we are now in the fasting time for the Muslim friends, and after, as Nindyo told us, that after the fasting time for the whole month, you know, usually people go back to their own house and other places. It's like Thanksgiving Day in the US. And it is very difficult this year because of the COVID-19. But what is beautiful with the end of the Ramadan is that both Muslim and Christians and also other religious people, you know, visit to each other to give blessings and bringing food, and I guess that's the spirit of friendship and sisterhood, brotherhood that keep us, you know, as a nation. No matter what your religion is, no matter what your, you know, race is, so the spirit of togetherness, not as a political commodity, not as a political, you know, project, but as we can see on the grassroots. I think that's the most important thing to keep the nation united. While in the US, you know, we can see that the unity somehow is politicized very deeply by you know, by the politicians from both sides, from the blue and the red states. So in Indonesia, what makes us united, I guess, is that the spirit of friendship is living within the grassroots. And that's why the most dangerous movement now is how the fundamentalist Muslims trying to tear apart the friendship, and they are working among the Muslim grassroots in you know, remote areas, and yeah. So I think what we can share from Indonesia to the world is that we have a very different kind of Muslim, of Islam. That's what we always trying to reflect on here in Indonesia, that Islam in Indonesia is totally different than Islam as perceived by, especially by people in the Europe and in the West, as a, you know, as a violent religion. No, in Indonesia, Islam is a peaceful religion, and the Muslim people are our friends, our brothers, sisters, and they are very peaceful. Yeah, in spite of you know, a certain radical groups coming from abroad into Indonesia. So I think the key is how to build inter-religious friendships on the grassroots with our neighbors. Yeah, that's what I can share.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you, Mel.
Joas, is there any news in Indonesia, given that Muslims is very diverse in Indonesia? Are there radical groups or fundamentalist groups that have movements like the conservatives some conservatives in the United States, which don't believe in science or in the reality of the pandemic that we are facing now?
Well, yeah, but now they have to face the reality. I mean, it's already there everywhere. So they are less and less. I mean, yeah, people are more realize more that this is not a joke. It's not a joke. Yeah, I'm proud of my Indonesian government and also my Indonesian, the whole citizen, because, well, we are more clever than your president, I guess. I'm sorry, folks. In the sense that according to the research, Indonesia is #1 in terms of social solidarity. So people always accuse Indonesian government for being too late in responding to the COVID-19, but in fact we have a very important treasure, which is the social solidarity. So you can find so many people jump in and helping, giving and contributing to the cause. So that's what I'm proud of with the fellow Indonesians right now, in spite of our lack of medical supplies and so forth. And the government is very, very strong in pushing the not lockdown but the social distancing, and not to open up the economy too soon.
Mm-hmm.
Because it could be disastrous.
Any other comments or questions?
I've really enjoyed this Theology Online tab very much. This is Clark. Thank you.
Thank you, Clark.
Well, I want to thank you for being with us from Indonesia and everything.
Thank you.
Yeah, and echo that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Mike.
Ask him about something.
Well, I want to share that I was in Indonesia also just last March.
Oh, where?
And
in Jakarta or?
In Yogyakarta and Jakarta.
Yeah.
And I
YouTube videos.
Yeah, I've been making YouTube videos in Indonesia.
Oh.
And
Okay.
so I had a really I wanted to revisit this street barber shop in Yogyakarta.
Under the tree?
Under the tree, yes. Cukur Cukan, yeah, di jalanan, yeah.
Yeah.
And so he, but he wasn't there. I went to revisit him, but he wasn't there. But then the becak driver, he took me to the street barber's home, and so I got to get to know the family a bit more. And
oh, wonderful.
So that was a good experience, and I felt they needed help and everything. So that ended up raising money really fast through my YouTube subscribers.
Oh, okay.
And it turned into a $700 street barber shave. But I did the video is coming out really soon, but I didn't finish it yet.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that
yeah.
really
I'm
helped the
looking
family
forward to
just before the coronavirus over. So that was, I felt really good when I left because I changed their life just before the crisis, so they could really amazing that they could weather the storm really well with getting so much money.
Yeah.
That's my my most recent Indonesia experience.
I hope you come back here later.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nindyo.
Mike, I'm wondering if you would like to say something before.
Oh, thank you. I don't have anything to add.
Oh,
I
okay.
just wanted to say how much I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Mike. Great. Yeah. Because I heard you would say something. All right. Well, all right. Thank you, everyone. I think this is a wonderful evening we have. This session was joined by about 35 people coming from the States and also from Indonesia and even from many islands from Indonesia. I saw Pendeta Freddy Stonsiledi with us from Borneo, from Kalimantan. Thank you. And also, yeah, Bung Tristan, Ibu Endang, Alfian, Isabella Novsima, who is in Madison, New Jersey, also with us. Thank you for this evening. And also Pak Tony is with us. Thank you, Pak Tony. All right. Let us thank again Joas for a very engaging and inspiring session. Thank you, Joas.
And thank you, Nindyo.
And I hope this is not the last time for you to be with us. So we would like to have you in our future sessions.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, folks, stay home and stay safe. Thank you very much for all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nindyo.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Joas.
Thank you.
Thank
God
you.
bless.